Hello and welcome to week 9 in SLP 104 for Stray Mountain Community College. We're going to talk about phonology this week. We titled this instruction, The Building Blocks of Speech. Phonology is the study of speech sound systems and the normally developing child. While we've been talking about their development of language, we also need to talk about how they acquire speech sounds. And while they're acquiring language, they are acquiring speech sounds also in a developmental order. They are acquired simultaneously. Speech doesn't happen apart from language in the young child, and language doesn't happen apart from speech. Speech isn't a synonym for language. We've talked about that before. Certainly it can exist apart from language. Again, we've talked a little bit about this. In young children, we have talked about the experience of echolalia, and echolalia being the repetition of a sequence of words or a short utterance, but it doesn't have meaning for the child, and that can be speech separated from language. You also see it in some animals where a parrot can imitate speech, again without meaning. Language can exist apart from speech also. We have written language, we have sign language, we have body language, facial expression. All of this does express a message, an idea, an intent, and certainly doesn't need to have spoken language or spoken oral speech connected to it. Speech or speech sound systems do have their own timetable of development, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about this week. A couple of the vocabulary words that you need to become familiar with. The first one being phoneme, a speech sound system. Make sure that my audio is on here. The speech sound system a phoneme is a speech sound that is distinct from all other sounds. So the difference between b and p, the difference between sh and ch, the difference between s and z, each one of those is a phoneme. Each language has its particular set of phonemes from which it constructs words. And when we study the sounds or the speech sounds of a language, we call it the phonology of that language. Phonology is the study of the speech sounds and the rules with which they are sequenced in order to make a word. For example, in English, we have rules about how often vowels need to be inserted between consonants in order for a word to be called a word. There are 3 methods of describing speech: traditional phonetics, distinctive features, and phonological processes. For the purposes of this course, we're going to spend most of our time talking about traditional phonetics and phonological processes. Those are the 2 that you'll be most likely to experience in the field of speech pathology. Traditional phonetics involves the use of the International Phonetic Alphabet, and for short, we call it IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. The International Phonetic Alphabet has a way of describing each particular phoneme, remember that's a separate sound, by its voicing, its place, and its manner. What that means is with voicing, whether or not your vocal folds are turned on and off. The place is the place in the mechanism, the oral structures, where the sound is made, and the manner is the airflow management of the sound. So in terms of traditional phonetics, again, IPA is the tool by which we describe each phoneme, and each phoneme is described in terms of voicing, place, and manner. So let's review voicing again. Voicing is described in 2 ways, either voiced or unvoiced. So each phoneme is described as being either voiced or voiceless. Voiced or unvoiced is another way of saying it. Voiced is when their vocal folds are moving. So, for example, in the sound ah, you hear a vibration. That vibration is considered voicing. The vocal folds are vibrating together. Sounds that have no vocal fold movement, where there is no vocal fold vibration, would be sounds like or t. Take your fingers, 3 of them, put them on your neck, right at about the Adam's apple. And let's do this one together. We're going to say the phoneme z, as in zoo. Zzz. You should feel a vibration underneath your fingers. Now do the same thing again. Hold those same 3 fingers against your throat right at the Adam's apple. And go s, as in Sam. S. You should no longer feel any vibration underneath your fingers. Which one would you say is voiced? Which one has the vibration of the vocal folds? That's right. Z, z vibrates the vocal folds together. S is unvoiced or voiceless. S and Z are actually what we call cognate pairs. Cognate pairs are consonants that are either voiced or voiceless, and they come together as a pair, meaning they have one that is voiceless, one that is voiced. They are essentially the same sound in every other way, such as place and manner. So, in English, we have some examples. One pair is p and b. Put your fingers on your throat again. P is voiceless or unvoiced. There is no vibration of the vocal folds. B is voiced. B. You can feel the vibration of your fingers. Another example is t and d, or k and g. Can you think of any others? Yes, that's right. S and z, v and f, f and v. Each pair is called a cognate pair. And often when we write goals or work on a speech sound acquisition in young children, we're working on a cognate pair. The second way sounds are classified in International Phonetic Alphabet is the place of articulation. So take a look at this diagram. It shows you some of the places of articulation that we use for English. We use our lips, our hard palate, the soft palate, the alveolar ridge. The alveolar ridge isn't pictured here in this particular diagram, but it's directly behind the top front teeth. We also use the glottis to make this sound. We use the tongue, and we use our teeth. Let's go over some of the sounds that are made in each of these places. Bilabial is made with 2 lips. Let's look at that word, bilabial. Bi means 2, labial means lips, and these sounds are made by pushing the lips together, both of them. B, p, and m. Labiodental are sounds that are made with the lips touching the lower teeth. Excuse me. I apologize. The lower lip touching the upper teeth, such as f and v. One lip addresses the teeth. F, v. You'll recognize that as a cognate pair. Interdental sounds are made with the tongue between the teeth, and in English, we have the cognate pair of f and v. We call these F and theta to keep them separated. They are a cognate pair and differ by voicing, but they are made in the same place, interdentally. In some cultures, such as Spanish, a T and D are often made interdentally. An alveolar sound is made by touching the tip of the tongue at the alveolar ridge. So, t, d, n, o, s, z. You try it. Lift up your tongue and say these words, t, or say these sounds, t, d, s, z, n, o. You'll feel the tongue tip right at the alveolar ridge. Those are the small bumps behind your top front teeth. The alveolopalatal sound is made by the front of the tongue or the blade of the tongue that touches somewhere between the alveolar ridge and the hard palate. It's if you slide your tongue tip back right to the behind your top front teeth until the ridges stop, or till the pronounced ridges stop, that's right where your tongue blade will attach to make the sounds sh, ch, j, and zh. I apologize. There's an X on the screen right now in place of what is the correct symbol for um, we weren't able to get true IPA printed onto the slides. So there was just a mistake that was made. It should be the letter Z. Let me see if I can replace that with an elongated tail. So unfortunately, it doesn't print well on the slide itself. The symbols that I'm using here on the slide are not true IPA. I'm going to give you a link that I want you to go try so that you can practice a little bit with IPA. So I'm going to have to look that one up. Let me make sure. You know what? I'll post it in class just so that you have it, that you can play with IPA a little bit. I think I'm misspelling it as I'm putting on the screen right now. So let me post that in class so you can go play with what real IPA looks like, the actual written transcription of IPA. Palatal sounds are made with the blade of the tongue or the body of the tongue moving towards the hard palate, such as the sound y. Velar sounds are made with the body of the tongue towards the soft palate or towards the velum. Think of that as where the uvula hangs down in the back of your throat, that little dangly piece of skin called the uvula. Right ahead of that is the velum. It's a soft part of your palate, and where we make the sounds. The third way in which we describe phonemes, according to traditional phonetics, is in terms of the manner. That's how the airflow is managed. Plosives, or stops, they're synonyms for each other. You think of explosive sounds, sounds that are done with a burst of energy. P, t, k, b, d, g. You can't hang on to them. They come in a little burst. So that's why they are called plosives or stops. They stop the airflow in the vocal tract. Fricatives are, think of the noisy sounds like friction. So things that make a noise like s, z, f, sh. Those are called fricatives. So think of friction when you're thinking of what sounds those are. There is a constriction in the vocal tract of the air. Affricates are a combination of a plosive and a fricative. So if you combine t with sh, you get ch. If you combine, I'm going to fix this one here. If you combine d with j, you get j. A nasal sound is when the airflow is allowed to resonate through the nasal cavity. And we do this for n, and ng. Glides are w and y, and liquids are l and Distinctive features talk about sounds in terms of being consonantal or vocalic. And we're not going to address those too significantly in this course. Phonological processes is the third way that sounds are described in terms of how we describe phonemes in our language, or at least how speech sounds are manifested in the rules that are applied to how we use them. Phonological processes describe how sounds are put together. They are a simplified version of adult productions. They are very typical. They are normal in children up to the age of 4 years old. They are rule systems that children use to make productions that fit into both their understanding of phonological processes or phonological systems and their ability to produce complex sound productions. Phonological processes are a way we describe how children produce words. It doesn't describe why they do it, it just describes what we're hearing. So the first phonological process we're going to talk about is syllable reduction. Very common in young children. You'll hear them say things such as nana for banana, helicopter for helicopter, pewter for computer. And what we call this is syllable reduction, where they delete or leave off the unstressed or weak syllable in a multisyllabic word. Final consonant deletion is just that. Children take the last consonant, like p, k, t, in the end of a word, and they leave it off. So cup becomes ka, make becomes me, and hot dog becomes hada. Metathesis is where they actually transpose a couple of sounds in the word. So paschetti for spaghetti, Paulnellish for nail polish, nerdletech for turtleneck, and a very common one is aminal for aminal for animal. Cluster reduction is where they take a word and they delete usually the frication in a consonant cluster combination, or they'll delete another moving sound such as a liquid or a glide. So if the word is skip, they're likely to leave off the s and just say kip. If the word is school, they're likely to leave off the s and just say cool. I kip to cool is I skip to school, using process of cluster reduction. You'll also hear kids delete R's and L's. So a flag becomes a fag. A bridge becomes a bidge. They are again reducing the cluster of consonants. They take one of the sounds and produce them and leave off the other. Fronting is taking a sound that should be made at the velum or at the back of the hard palate, and they move it forward and make it more towards perhaps the alveolar ridge. So dog, the g being made as a velar sound, is moved forward to the alveolar ridge, and the child says dod. And this can also be called assimilation, whereas they take one sound that already occurs in a word and they reproduce that same sound again. Cake becomes tate, so that the k in cake, both of them, the initial one and the one at the end of the word, excuse me, are changed from velar sounds to alveolar sounds. And the tongue tip then touches at the front of the mouth, hence the term fronting. Co-articulation impacts how a child says sounds because each sound impacts the sounds around it. So in rapid speech, as sounds blend together, they influence each other on either side. Co-articulation is not a process. Co-articulation is just something that happens as a result of connected speech. Some examples of co-articulation are how we say kindergarten. Rarely do you hear people say kindergarten. They say kindergarten. Rarely do you hear someone ask for butter. They would ask for butter. The reason being is b, and are all voiced. While the t is voiceless, it's much more difficult for our mechanism to shut off the voicing long enough to just say the t in the word. And instead, the voicing continues, and t becomes d, as in butter. So how do sounds become acquired? Well, the first meaningful words happen around a year old, and they're typically syllables or reduplicated syllables. Usually you'll hear stops first, PTK, BDG, M's and N's. And the next most likely ones are the ones that move their lips, so b, m, p, and alveolars, t and d. Sometimes a cut and ga are thrown in. We've talked a little bit about this when we talked about language acquisition. 18 to 24 months, you'll start to see the emergence of all types of sounds. That's when you start to see frication take place. Sh, s, v, n, j, ch. And by 48 months or 4 years of age, all the processes have eliminated. Well, speech sounds aren't quite the same way as processes. While processes, the rule systems that children employ to simplify complex adult productions, are eliminated by 48 months. It's not necessarily true that all sounds that are made in error by the child are eliminated by the same age. Children take a while, in some cases, to learn how to produce the more complex sounds in our language. For example, here is one version of how sound acquisition might be pictured. There are many different theories, many different research studies that might show differences about when these sounds are acquired. But in general, if you think of this in terms of just how, in what order they're acquired, it's pretty close. So you'll see those stop consonants and nasals, a few fricatives by 3. By 4, you start to really hear a good k, g, sh, ch, j, and ya. And 6, you see the ul and th. And by 7, z and Certainly, many 3-year-olds articulate absolutely correctly and can produce all of these sounds correctly at 3. But the standard is we just don't necessarily expect all children to produce these sounds by these ages. So we wait in speech therapy until a sound is considered late or later developing, the late 8, so to speak. When those have not developed by 6, 7 years old, that's when we would perhaps intervene to facilitate language and speech sound acquisition. Processes, if we back up here, since we expect those to be gone by 48 months, likely by 4 years old, we'll intervene if a child is showing things such as fronting or cluster reduction or metathesis, final consonant deletion, and syllable reduction. We might intervene even as young as 3 if a child's speech is unintelligible. Processes have that effect, where if a child uses a lot of processes in their speech, they tend to be difficult to understand. Articulation a child might have, and that's here with sound acquisition. Articulation errors could be just one sound. Maybe they just can't say a K or G, or they just can't say an R, and those tend to not interfere with intelligibility too much. Intelligibility is a term that we use to describe how well I can understand someone. It doesn't have anything to do with how intelligent someone is. It's just how well I understand them. Now, if a child had a lot of articulation errors, in other words, these sounds that you see, p, b, t, d, m, n, ha, r, f, if those are all in error, then certainly intelligibility would be impacted, but that would be also very unlikely. That doesn't typically happen. When we see children that are very unintelligible, we typically think that they are using an excessive number of phonological processes. When we talk about phonological errors in general, just overall, if we say they have errors in phonology, it can be articulation or it can be phonological processes. If it's a phonological process, it's an error of a rule system, such as final consonant deletion, syllable reduction, cluster reduction. If it's an articulation error, then that's when it might be like a frontal lisp, a distortion of R, a lateral lisp, one that sounds like this, sit down instead of sit down. Shoes for shoes, wabbit for rabbit. Those are articulation errors, not necessarily processes, and they don't necessarily impact intelligibility, but the production of them is different for the child's age. All right, well, that's the overview of the building blocks of speech, the study of phonology. I look forward to seeing you in conference tonight.